A Maryland cold case from 2000 finally cracked, and the arrest has left an entire community reeling. On October 16, 2000, hunters walking through wooded Baltimore County stumbled upon skeletal remains hidden beneath fallen leaves near White Marsh. She was young, maybe 20 to 35, wearing fragments of a light shirt and dark pants. But she had no name, no purse, no identity. For 25 years, Baltimore County detectives chased shadows while families of missing daughters held their breath with every phone call. Clay reconstructions gave her a face in 2002 and again in 2010, but silence followed. Isotope testing in 2017 revealed she'd lived in the mid-Atlantic for years before her death. DNA genealogy began unraveling family trees in 2019, building backwards through genetic data like archaeologists piecing together ancient pottery. The community grieved a nameless daughter, leaving flowers on a grave marked only unidentified female, 2000. But when the truth finally emerged, it would shatter everything this quiet town believed about the people they trusted most. Before we get into the story, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. The October morning started like any other for the hunting party. 3 men had permission to walk the wooded lot off Philadelphia Road in White Marsh, Maryland. The leaves crunched beneath their boots, painted in autumn gold and crimson. They expected to see deer tracks, maybe find a good spot to set up blinds for the coming season. Instead, they found her. She lay beneath a shallow covering of brush and fallen leaves, as if someone had tried to hide her but gave up halfway through the job. The hunters stopped dead in their tracks. One of them whispered a prayer, another backed away, fumbling for his cell phone with shaking fingers. By noon, the woods buzzed with activity. Police tape stretched between oak trees like yellow party streamers at a celebration no one wanted to attend. Baltimore County detectives arrived in unmarked cars, their faces grim. The crime scene photographer snapped pictures methodically, documenting what remained of a life cut short. She had been reduced to bones and fragments of clothing. A light-colored shirt, possibly white or cream, clung to her ribcage. Dark fabric that might have been pants scattered around her lower body. No shoes, no jewelry, no purse, no identification. Detective Sarah Martinez crouched beside the remains, careful not to disturb the scene. She had worked homicide for 8 years, but something about this discovery felt different. The deliberate placement suggested this wasn't just a body dump. Someone had brought her here with purpose. "What do you think?" asked Detective Jim Harrison, her partner of 3 years. "She was left here on purpose," Martinez replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Question is, why here? Why this spot?" The medical examiner's team arrived as afternoon shadows grew long. They worked with tweezers and brushes, collecting every bone fragment, every scrap of fabric. Each piece went into carefully labeled evidence bags. Each bag represented another piece of a puzzle they didn't yet know how to solve. By evening, news vans lined Philadelphia Road. Reporters spoke into cameras with the woods behind them, their voices carrying the weight of tragedy. The discovery of human remains in Baltimore County has shocked this quiet community, one reporter announced. Police are calling it a homicide, but the victim's identity remains unknown. Families across Maryland and beyond heard the news and felt their hearts skip. Was this their missing daughter? Their sister? Their friend who never came home? The phone lines at Baltimore County Police Headquarters lit up. Desperate voices asked the same questions over and over. How old was she? How tall? What was she wearing? When did she die? Each question carried years of waiting and worry. The fluorescent lights in the office of the chief medical examiner hummed overhead as Dr. Patricia Chen began her examination. The skeletal remains lay arranged on a stainless steel table, each bone carefully positioned. After 16 years as a forensic pathologist, she had seen countless victims, but Jane Doe cases always haunted her most. The bones told their own story. The skull suggested a young woman, likely between 20 and 35 years old. Dental records would be crucial for identification, but the teeth showed no obvious signs of expensive orthodontic work. The long bones indicated she had been approximately 5 feet 4 inches tall, with a medium build. Dr. Chen studied the pelvic bones under bright examination lights. The sciatic notch and pubic angle confirmed female gender. The fusion of growth plates suggested the victim had reached full adult development before her death. But determining exactly when death occurred proved more challenging. The bones show significant weathering, Dr. Chen dictated to her recording device, consistent with outdoor exposure for several months to several years. Cause of death cannot be determined from skeletal remains alone. However, the circumstances of discovery and deliberate concealment suggest homicidal violence. The light-colored shirt appeared to be cotton blend, possibly a t-shirt or blouse. The dark fabric seemed synthetic, maybe polyester pants or jeans. No fabric care labels remained intact. No distinctive patterns or logos survived the elements. Forensic anthropologist Dr. Robert Kim arrived to assist with the analysis. He specialized in reading stories written in bone. Under magnification, he searched for signs of trauma, cut marks, fractures, any evidence of how she died. "I don't see obvious perimortem trauma," he told Dr. Chen. "No bullet holes in bone, no blade marks, no blunt force fractures." But absence of evidence wasn't evidence of absence. Soft tissue injuries wouldn't show on bones. Strangulation, suffocation, or poisoning could kill without leaving marks on the skeleton. The isotope analysis would come later, when technology advanced enough to read chemical signatures in bone. For now, they collected samples for DNA testing and prepared dental charts for comparison against missing persons records. By the end of the examination, Jane Doe had been assigned a case number. Her bones would be stored in the medical examiner's office. Her DNA would be uploaded to the FBI's CODIS database. Her dental records would be circulated to dentists across the region. But she still had no name. Dr. Chen completed her report with clinical precision. Homicide by undetermined means. Female. Age 20 to 35. Height approximately 5 feet 4 inches. Race possibly Caucasian or mixed ancestry, though bone analysis could only suggest probabilities. The report would sit in case files for years, waiting for technology and investigation to catch up with tragedy. Detective Martinez spread the files across the conference table like a dealer shuffling cards of sorrow. Each manila folder contained someone's daughter, sister, friend. Each represented a family holding their breath, waiting for answers that might never come. The comparison process was methodical and heartbreaking. Height, weight, age, race, dental records, DNA samples when available. Every detail mattered. Every similarity sparked hope. Every discrepancy closed another door. "Let's start with local cases," Martinez said to her partner Harrison. "Women reported missing in Maryland over the past 5 years who match our Jane Doe's profile." The first file belonged to Jennifer Walsh, age 24, reported missing from Towson in 1998. She was 5'4" with brown hair, last seen leaving her apartment for a job interview. But Jennifer's dental records didn't match. Work that would have shown clearly in Jane Doe's teeth. Case closed. Hope died a little more. The second file contained Rebecca Martinez. No relation to the detective despite sharing a surname. Age 31. Missing from Annapolis since 1999. The height and build seemed right, but Rebecca had distinctive tattoos that would have survived on skin contact with bone. Jane Doe showed no such markings. Another family would continue waiting. The stack grew smaller as the rejections piled up. Sarah Kowalski from Delaware, too tall. Maria Santos from Pennsylvania, wrong age range. Kelly Thompson from Virginia. Different ancestry markers. Detective Harrison pulled up missing persons databases on his computer. The National Missing and Unidentified Persons System showed hundreds of cases across the Mid-Atlantic region. Each photograph represented someone who had walked out of their life and vanished. "What about this one?" Harrison pointed to a case from West Virginia. Amy Patterson, age 27, missing since early 2000. Height matches. Age fits the range. Martinez reviewed the file carefully. Amy had been reported missing by her roommate after failing to return from a night out. But Amy had a distinctive scar on her left forearm from childhood surgery. The medical examiner found no evidence of old bone trauma that would suggest such an injury. The phone rang constantly. Families who had seen news reports called with new leads. Missing persons detectives from other jurisdictions asked about comparisons. Each conversation carried the same desperate hope and crushing disappointment. Mrs. Catherine Miller called from Pennsylvania. Her daughter Lisa had been missing for 2 years. The age and height seemed right. Could detectives check? "Ma'am, we'll need your daughter's dental records," Martinez explained gently. "And if possible, a DNA sample from you or your family." It was the same conversation she had 30 times that week. Same questions. The same procedures. The same gentle letdown when the science said no. By the end of October, they had compared Jane Doe against 47 missing women from 6 states. Each comparison took days. Each rejection took something from the detectives' souls. Jane Doe remained nameless, but she was no longer alone. She had joined a sisterhood of the lost, the forgotten, the taken too soon. The call went out through churches, community centers, and word of mouth. White Marsh would not let Jane Doe fade into forgotten darkness. If she had no family to mourn her, the community would become her family. If she had no name to be spoken in prayer, they would speak for her silence. November's chill bit through coats as nearly 200 people gathered in the parking lot of St. Mark's Lutheran Church, just 3 miles from where she was found. Children clutched their parents' hands. Teenagers stood awkwardly with their phones tucked away. Adults whispered among themselves, sharing theories and fears. Pastor David Kellerman had organized vigils before. For car accident victims, cancer patients, soldiers lost overseas. But this felt different. How do you mourn someone you've never met? How do you grieve a life you know nothing about? "We gather tonight not because we knew her name," Pastor Kellerman began, his voice carrying across the parking lot, "but because we know she mattered. Someone loved her. Someone is missing her. Someone needs to know she has not been forgotten." Margaret Thompson, 73, and a White Marsh resident for 40 years, had brought her granddaughter Emma. Age 8, Emma asked why everyone looked so sad if they didn't know the lady who died. "Sometimes we're sad for people we've never met, honey," Margaret explained. "Because sadness is how we show we care." The candles flickered to life one by one, passed from flame to flame, until the parking lot glowed like a constellation fallen to earth. People spoke her case number aloud. Baltimore County Jane Doe 2247, because it was the only name they had for her. Detective Martinez attended in civilian clothes, standing at the back of the crowd. She watched faces illuminated by candlelight and wondered if Jane Doe's killer might be among them. In her experience, murderers sometimes inserted themselves into investigations, drawn back to scenes like moths to flames. Mrs. Elena Rodriguez had driven from Baltimore City after seeing the news coverage. Her daughter Carmen had been missing for 6 months. The age and description didn't match. But grief recognizes grief. Sometimes you attend vigils not for the victim, but for yourself. "I pray she finds peace," Elena whispered to her candle flame. "And I pray someone finds justice." The crowd began to sing "Amazing Grace," voices rising into the November night. Some sang strongly, others barely whispered the words. A few simply moved their lips, too emotional to produce sound. As the final verse faded, Pastor Kellerman offered a closing prayer. "Lord, we commit this unknown daughter to your care. Watch over her family wherever they may be. Guide the investigators seeking truth, and help our community heal from this shadow that has fallen across us." The candles were blown out one by one, but the light had served its purpose. Jane Doe was no longer just a case number. She had become a shared responsibility, a communal daughter claimed by people who had never seen her alive. Melted wax pooled on the asphalt like frozen tears. By morning, maintenance crews would sweep it away, but the promise lingered in the hearts of those who attended. She would not be forgotten. The FBI's combined DNA index system represented hope in liquid form. CODIS had launched nationally in 1998, creating the largest DNA database in the world. By 2000, It held profiles from convicted offenders, crime scenes, and unidentified remains. Jane Doe's genetic code would join millions of others, waiting for a match. Detective Martinez watched as forensic technician Lisa Chang prepared the samples. Chang had been processing DNA evidence for 5 years, since graduating from the University of Maryland with a degree in forensic science. Each case represented someone's worst day, but unidentified remains carried special weight. "We extracted enough material for a full STR profile," Chang explained, referring to the short tandem repeat analysis that had become the gold standard for DNA identification. 13 core markers plus gender identification. If she's in the system, we'll find her. The bone samples had yielded surprisingly good DNA despite months of outdoor exposure. Maryland's climate could destroy genetic material quickly, but Jane Doe's remains had been partially protected by leaf cover and the acidic soil that preserved organic compounds. Baltimore County Police had collected DNA samples from families of potential matches. Mothers, fathers, siblings, anyone whose genetic profile might help identify Jane Doe. Each sample came with a story of loss and desperate hope. The Chen family from Rockville provided samples after their daughter Jessica went missing in 1999. Mrs. Chen's hands shook as the technician swabbed the inside of her cheek. "Please, let it be her," she whispered. "So we can finally bring her home." But science spoke in probabilities and percentages. When the comparison was complete, Jessica Chen was excluded as a match. The family's grief remained unresolved. The Morrison family from Pennsylvania drove 4 hours to provide their samples. Their daughter Kelly had vanished after her 21st birthday party. They waited 3 weeks for results, not a match. Each exclusion narrowed the possibilities but deepened the mystery. If Jane Doe wasn't any of the local missing women, where had she come from? Who was looking for her? Why had no one reported her missing? Dr. Kim from the medical examiner's office reviewed the dental charts one more time. Jane Doe's teeth showed signs of basic dental care but no expensive work. No gold crowns, no unusual fillings, no orthodontic records that might help with identification. Detective Harrison coordinated with missing persons units across the region. Bulletins went out to police departments in Maryland, Virginia, Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and West Virginia. Someone, somewhere, must be missing a young woman matching Jane Doe's description. The phone calls trickled in for weeks. Each one started with hope and ended with disappointment. She wasn't Sarah from Richmond. She wasn't Amanda from Philadelphia. She wasn't Michelle from Camden. Christmas passed, with Jane Doe still unidentified. The evidence vial sat in the FBI laboratory, waiting for technology to catch up with tragedy. CODIS would continue growing, adding new profiles every day. Somewhere in that expansion lay the key to Jane Doe's identity. But for now, she remained a number in a database, a sample in a vial, a mystery in a file cabinet that grew thicker every month. By spring 2001, Jane Doe's case file had grown from a single manila folder to 3 thick binders. Detective Martinez could trace the investigation's arc through paperwork. Initial optimism, giving way to methodical persistence, then gradual resignation that this might be a case that never closed. The file contained crime scene photographs that still made her stomach clench. Autopsy reports written in clinical language that somehow made the tragedy feel more real, not less. Dental charts that looked like abstract art but might hold the key to identification. Missing persons comparisons that read like a catalog of broken hearts. Detective Harrison had been reassigned to other cases, but Martinez couldn't let go. Jane Doe had become personal. She kept the woman's photograph on her desk, not a crime scene photo, but the facial reconstruction that gave her features and dignity. Every morning, Martinez looked at that face and made the same silent promise. Today might be the day. The leads had slowed to a trickle. Occasional tips from psychics claiming supernatural knowledge. Well-meaning citizens who thought they recognized the reconstruction from old yearbooks or family photos. Other detectives from distant jurisdictions asking about possible connections to their own cold cases. Each lead required investigation. Each investigation required time. Each dead end added pages to the file. Mrs. Patricia Williams from North Carolina had been certain Jane Doe was her missing niece. She drove 8 hours to Baltimore with photo albums and DNA samples. The comparison took 2 weeks. Not a match. Mrs. Williams cried in the police station parking lot before driving home empty-handed. A tip came from New Mexico claiming Jane Doe matched a missing person from Albuquerque. The dental records request took 3 months to process through bureaucratic channels. When they finally arrived, the teeth didn't match. Another dead end filed away. The Baltimore County Police Department had changed computer systems twice since the case began. Jane Doe's files had to be scanned and digitized, then reformatted again when the next upgrade arrived. Her case number had been adjusted to match new filing protocols, but she remained as elusive as ever. Martinez sometimes pulled the file just to read through it, looking for connections she might have missed. The isotope testing wouldn't be available for years, but she wondered if it might provide new clues. Where had Jane Doe lived? Where had she grown up? What had she eaten during her final months? The psychological profile suggested she had been killed by someone who knew her. The deliberate placement of the body indicated local knowledge of the wooded area. But without identity, there could be no investigation of relationships, no tracking of final movements, no interviews with friends and family. She remained frozen in time, a young woman who had lived and laughed and loved and died, reduced to measurements and evidence bags and bureaucratic filing systems. The case file sat in Martinez's desk drawer, pulled out whenever new missing persons reports matched the basic description. Each time, the same process. Each time, the same disappointment. Jane Doe was disappearing again, this time into the endless bureaucracy of unsolved cases. The clay model sat under fluorescent lights in the Baltimore County Police Department's conference room, drawing stares from everyone who passed. She had cheekbones and eye sockets, full lips, and a straight nose. She looked like someone's daughter, sister, friend. She looked alive. Forensic sculptor Karen Mitchell had spent 3 weeks creating Jane Doe's face. Mitchell worked for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, traveling across the country to give identity back to the nameless dead. Her tools were clay, tissue depth markers, and decades of anatomical knowledge. "I start with the skull," Mitchell explained to Detective Martinez. "These little markers show average tissue depth at different points on the face. Age, sex, and ancestry help determine the measurements." The process was part science, part art, part educated guesswork. Jane Doe's skull provided the foundation, but Mitchell had to interpret details that bones couldn't reveal. Eye color, hair color, skin tone, all remained unknown. The reconstruction showed a generic young woman who could have been anyone. The media unveiling drew television crews from Baltimore, Washington, and Philadelphia. Jane Doe's clay face appeared on evening news broadcasts across the mid-Atlantic region. Missing persons hotlines prepared for an avalanche of calls. "Someone out there knows who she is," Martinez told the cameras. "Someone is missing this woman. We need them to come forward." The calls started within hours. A mother in Delaware was certain the reconstruction matched her daughter who had run away in 1998. A sister in Virginia saw resemblance to a sibling who had struggled with addiction. A former roommate in Pennsylvania thought the face looked familiar. Each call required follow-up. Each follow-up raised hopes. Each disappointment added weight to the investigation. Mrs. Helen Kowalski drove from Reading, Pennsylvania, carrying photo albums and her daughter's baby teeth. Sarah Kowalski had been 26 when she vanished 2 years earlier. The facial reconstruction looked similar enough to convince a grieving mother. Detective Martinez sat with Mrs. Kowalski in a small interview room, watching her compare photographs to the clay model. The desperation was heartbreaking. The hope was even worse. "The eyes look like Sarah's," Mrs. Kowalski whispered. "And the shape of the face. Could this really be her?" Dental records told the truth that photographs couldn't. Sarah Kowalski had expensive orthodontic work that would have been clearly visible in Jane Doe's skull. The comparison took 3 days. The answer was final. Not a match. Mrs. Kowalski collapsed when Martinez delivered the news. She had driven to Baltimore, believing her 2-year search was ending. Instead, she returned home with fresh wounds and questions that might never be answered. The facial reconstruction appeared in newspapers from Richmond to New York. Crime shows featured Jane Doe's story. Missing persons websites shared the image. But weeks passed without a confirmed identification. The clay face stared from police station walls with empty eyes that seemed to ask why no one recognized her. How could someone live and die without anyone noticing her absence? How could a young woman disappear so completely that even her reconstructed face sparked no recognition? Jane Doe's clay features became a symbol of all the nameless dead, all the missing daughters, all the families waiting for answers that might never come. The Baltimore Sun's crime reporter, Michael Stevens, had covered Jane Doe's discovery in 2000. Now, as he prepared his 5-year anniversary story, he struggled with the same question that haunted investigators. How do you write about nothing new? The headline read, Jane Doe Mystery Enters 5th Year. The article occupied a modest space on page B6, buried between coverage of a city council meeting and high school football scores. 5 years earlier, her discovery had made front-page news. Now, she had become background noise in a world that had moved on to fresher tragedies. Stevens interviewed Detective Martinez by phone from the police station. Her voice carried the weariness of someone who had answered the same questions hundreds of times. "We follow every lead," Martinez insisted. "Every tip gets investigated. We will not let this case go cold." But the file cabinet told a different story. Months between meaningful developments, tips dwindling from daily to weekly to occasional, other cases demanding attention, Jane Doe slowly fading from active investigation to periodic review. The medical examiner's office had updated her case file 3 times, adding new measurements and observations. The FBI had refined her DNA profile using improved techniques, but she remained unidentified, unclaimed, unknown. Dr. Chen from the medical examiner's office had developed a theory over the years. Jane Doe might have been transient, someone living on society's margins where disappearances often went unreported. Homeless women, drug addicts, sex workers, vulnerable populations whose absences might not trigger official missing person reports. She could have been estranged from family, Dr. Chen speculated, or living under an assumed name, or from another country without proper documentation. There are many reasons why no one might have reported her missing. The community had largely forgotten Jane Doe by 2005. The vigils had stopped. The flowers left on her grave came less frequently. New crimes and tragedies had captured public attention. She had become part of the landscape, a sad story that people mentioned occasionally but no longer discussed actively. Pastor Kellerman still prayed for her during Sunday services, but his congregation had grown accustomed to the ritual. Jane Doe had joined the category of ongoing concerns that required periodic acknowledgement but not immediate action. The wooded lot where she was found had been sold to developers. Plans called for a small shopping center with chain restaurants and retail stores. Construction would begin within 2 years. Soon, the crime scene would be buried under asphalt and concrete. Stevens ended his anniversary article with a standard plea for information. Anyone with knowledge about Jane Doe's identity should contact Baltimore County Police. The phone number had been published countless times. The tip line rarely rang anymore. Jane Doe was vanishing a second time, disappearing into the vast catalog of unsolved cases that filled police databases across the country. She had become a statistic, a reminder of the limits of investigation and the persistence of mystery. But Detective Martinez kept her photograph on the desk, faded now but still present. Still watching, still waiting for someone to speak her name. The DNA laboratory at the Maryland State Police received new equipment in 2009, machines that could extract genetic profiles from smaller samples, analyze degraded material more effectively, and process results faster than ever before. The technology that had seemed cutting-edge when Jane Doe was discovered was now considered obsolete. Dr. Patricia Chang, the forensic DNA analyst, reviewed old cases to see which ones might benefit from reanalysis. Jane Doe 2000 to 247 sat near the top of her list. The original samples had yielded a complete STR profile. But new techniques might reveal additional markers or improve the quality of existing data. We can try Y chromosome analysis for any male DNA that might be mixed in, Chang explained to Detective Martinez. If her attacker left any biological evidence, these new methods might detect it. The reprocessing took 3 weeks. Chang worked methodically through the bone samples, extracting DNA with procedures that hadn't existed in 2000. The results were encouraging. A cleaner genetic profile with additional markers, but no male DNA detected. Jane Doe's attacker had left no biological calling card. The improved profile was uploaded to CODIS, replacing the older version. The database had grown exponentially since 2000, now containing millions of genetic profiles from across the country. Each new entry increased the possibility of a match, but also the complexity of comparison. Meanwhile, facial recognition technology had advanced significantly. The clay reconstruction from 2002 could now be digitally enhanced and run against databases of missing persons' photographs. Software could age faces, adjust features, and suggest possible matches based on mathematical algorithms. Detective Martinez watched the computer screen as technician David Park ran Jane Doe's reconstruction through the new system. Photographs flashed by. Missing women from across the Mid-Atlantic region, each scored by percentage likelihood of match. This one shows 78% facial similarity, Park noted, highlighting a missing person report from Virginia. Lisa Chang, age 24, missing since 1999. But Lisa Chang had been excluded years earlier, based on dental records and DNA analysis. The computer was seeing patterns that human eyes had missed, but science had already provided the definitive answer. The facial recognition software generated 47 potential matches above 70% similarity. Each one required review against existing case files. Each one revealed why previous investigators had ruled out the possibility. Too tall. Too short. Different dental records. Wrong DNA profile. Different timeline. Technology had advanced dramatically, but Jane Doe remained as mysterious as ever. Faster computers couldn't create answers that didn't exist. Better cameras couldn't photograph memories that had faded. More sophisticated software couldn't analyze evidence that had never been collected. The laboratory upgrade notice sat in Jane Doe's file as a reminder that science was constantly evolving. Techniques impossible in 2000 had become routine by 2010. Methods that seemed advanced in 2010 would be obsolete by 2020. But time was Jane Doe's enemy. Each passing year made witnesses forget details, made evidence degrade further, made her case seem less urgent among newer tragedies demanding attention. The transition to digital case management changed how investigators approached cold cases. Jane Doe's file, once confined to manila folders and filing cabinets, now existed in multiple computer systems that could cross-reference information across jurisdictions and time periods. Detective Lisa Park Martinez had retired in 2008. Inherited Jane Doe along with 47 other unsolved cases. Park brought fresh eyes and new technology to investigations that had languished for years. She started by digitizing every document, photograph, and piece of evidence from Jane Doe's case. The scanning process revealed details that had been overlooked or forgotten. A photograph from the original crime scene showed a partial footprint in mud near the body. Previous investigators had noted it but couldn't extract useful information with 2000-era technology. Park sent the image to the FBI's footwear database for analysis. Size 9 or 10 work boot, came the response. Possibly Timberland or similar brand. Tread pattern suggests work or hiking boot, not athletic shoe. The footprint might belong to the killer, or one of the hunters who discovered the body, or a detective who worked the scene. Without elimination samples, it was impossible to know. But it was something new, a detail that hadn't been fully explored. Park also discovered discrepancies in the missing persons comparisons. Several women had been ruled out based on height estimates that now seemed questionable. Jane Doe's skeletal remains suggested 5'4", but the margin of error was plus or minus 2 inches. Some previously excluded cases might warrant another look. The digital database allowed Park to search by multiple criteria simultaneously. Missing women aged 20 to 35, height 5'2" to 5'6". Reported missing between 1998 and 2000, from the Mid-Atlantic region. The computer generated 127 possible matches. Most had been investigated and excluded years earlier. But Park found 3 cases that seemed to have fallen through administrative cracks. Sarah Martinez from Richmond, no relation to the original detective, had been reported missing in early 2000. Her dental records had been requested but never received due to a change in the dentist's office management. Park spent 2 days tracking down Sarah Martinez's dental records. The comparison took a week to complete. Not a match, But the thoroughness felt important. Someone had cared enough about Sarah to report her missing. Someone deserved to know the investigation had been completed properly. The second case belonged to Kelly Thompson from Delaware. She had vanished after an argument with her boyfriend in late 1999. Local police had classified her as a voluntary missing adult who would likely return on her own. No dental records had ever been collected. Thompson's case required more detective work. Park contacted the boyfriend, now married and living in Pennsylvania. He provided Thompson's mother's contact information. The mother, now in her 70s, still hoped her daughter would come home. Thompson's dental records told a familiar story. Extensive orthodontic work that would have been visible in Jane Doe's skull. Another exclusion. Another family still waiting for answers. The digital revolution had made information more accessible, but it couldn't create answers that didn't exist. The isotope testing that Detective Park requested in 2017 represented a breakthrough in forensic science. By analyzing chemical signatures in Jane Doe's bones and teeth, scientists could determine where she had lived during different periods of her life. It was like reading a geographic diary written in calcium and carbon. Dr. Rebecca Santos at the Smithsonian's Anthropology Department specialized in isotope analysis for forensic cases. She had helped solve cold cases across the country by revealing victims' geographic origins and movements. Jane Doe's bones would tell their own story about water sources, regional geology, and dietary patterns. Tooth enamel forms during childhood and doesn't change after that, Dr. Santos explained to Detective Park. Bone tissue rebuilds continuously, reflecting more recent geographic residence. By comparing isotope signatures between teeth and bones, we can track movement patterns. The analysis took 6 months to complete. Jane Doe's teeth showed isotope signatures consistent with growing up in the mid-Atlantic region, possibly Maryland, Virginia, or Pennsylvania. Her bone tissue suggested she had remained in the same general area for several years before her death. She wasn't a recent transplant from another region, Dr. Santos concluded. This was someone who had lived locally for years, possibly her entire life. That should narrow the search parameters significantly. The findings contradicted earlier theories that Jane Doe might have been transient or from another region. She had local ties, local connections, local reasons for being in Maryland. Someone in the area should have known her, missed her, reported her absence. Detective Park updated the case file with the new information and resumed contact with families of missing women. The isotope data eliminated several out-of-state cases that had remained theoretical possibilities. It also reinforced the likelihood that Jane Doe's killer was someone local, someone familiar with the wooded area where she was found. The Baltimore Sun ran a follow-up story on the isotope findings. Jane Doe likely local woman, new testing reveals. The article sparked renewed interest in the case and fresh tips from the community. Mrs. Dorothy Miller called to ask about her daughter Jennifer, who had moved to Baltimore in 1998 for college and disappeared the following year. Jennifer had grown up in Pennsylvania, which matched the isotope data. But Jennifer's dental records had been compared in 2001 and excluded as a match. A former coworker called about Susan Davis, a woman who had worked at a local restaurant until she suddenly stopped showing up in early 2000. Susan had talked about problems with an ex-boyfriend who had been stalking her. The caller provided Susan's last known address and the name of the restaurant. Park spent a week tracking down Susan Davis. She found her living in North Carolina, working as a nurse and raising 2 children. Susan had fled Maryland to escape the stalking ex-boyfriend and had been afraid to contact police about her situation. She was alive and safe, but grateful that someone had cared enough to investigate. The isotope data had provided the most significant new evidence in years, but it still hadn't revealed Jane Doe's identity. She remained local but nameless, connected to the community but unknown to its residents. Detective Park's decision to use social media for Jane Doe's case represented a significant shift in investigative strategy. Traditional media had lost interest in a 20-year-old cold case, but Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter could reach audiences that newspapers and television couldn't access. The Baltimore County Police Department's Facebook page posted Jane Doe's story with the facial reconstruction image and isotope findings. Within hours, the post had been shared hundreds of times across Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. Comments poured in with suggestions, theories, and emotional responses to her story. Someone's daughter deserves to be remembered, wrote Jennifer Walsh from Annapolis, sharing in hopes someone recognizes her. This breaks my heart, posted Maria Santos from Baltimore. I can't imagine not knowing what happened to my child. The post reached demographics that traditional media missed. Younger adults who had grown up in the area during the 1980s and 1990s, who might remember missing classmates or neighbors. Social media algorithms pushed the content to users with connections to the Mid-Atlantic region, creating virtual neighborhoods of shared concern. Tara Mitchell, a Baltimore County resident, saw the post and immediately thought of her high school classmate Amy Patterson. Amy had struggled with addiction after graduation and had drifted away from her friend group. Tara hadn't seen or heard from Amy since the late 1990s. Amy was about the right age and height, Tara commented on the post. Haven't seen her since high school. Should I contact police? Detective Park messaged Tara directly through Facebook. Within 2 days, she had collected Amy Patterson's dental records from her childhood dentist and contacted Amy's mother for DNA samples. The comparison took a week to complete. Not a match. Amy Patterson's dental records showed different characteristics than Jane Doe's teeth. But the interaction illustrated social media's power to resurrect old memories and forgotten connections. The Instagram post featuring Jane Doe's reconstruction drew comments from across the country. True crime enthusiasts shared the image, adding hashtags like #JaneDoe, #Baltimore County, and #Unsolved Mystery. The post reached users who followed cold case accounts and missing person advocacy groups. One comment came from Oregon. She looks like someone I went to college with in Maryland in the late 90s. Girl named Lisa something. Lost touch after sophomore year. Park reached out to the commenter, collecting what details she could remember. The lead seemed promising until they discovered that Lisa something had graduated from college and was now living in California with her family. Another dead end. But the process showed how social media could uncover connections that traditional investigation might miss. Twitter proved less effective for sharing detailed case information, but helped spread awareness among true crime communities. Jane Doe's story was retweeted by accounts with thousands of followers, reaching audiences across the country. The social media campaign generated more tips in 2 months than traditional methods had produced in the previous 5 years. Most led nowhere. But the volume of response suggested that digital platforms might hold the key to solving cold cases in the internet age. Jane Doe's face had been seen by hundreds of thousands of people online, far more than had ever viewed her clay reconstruction in traditional media. The forensic genealogy revolution began in 2019, when Detective Park partnered with Parabon Nanolabs to apply genetic genealogy techniques to Jane Doe's case. The technology that had solved the Golden State Killer case might finally give Jane Doe her name back. Genetic genealogist Dr. Michelle Carter uploaded Jane Doe's DNA profile to GEDmatch, a public database where people shared their genetic information for family history research. Unlike CODIS, which only contained law enforcement profiles, GEDmatch held DNA data from hundreds of thousands of genealogy enthusiasts. We're looking for third or fourth cousins, Dr. Carter explained to Detective Park. People who share a common great-great-grandparent with Jane Doe. Once we find those genetic connections, we can build family trees and work our way down to identify her. The initial search found 17 potential matches at the third cousin level. Each match represented a genetic connection to Jane Doe, but building family trees from those connections required extensive genealogical research. Dr. Carter started with the strongest match, a woman named Patricia Wong, who had uploaded her DNA results to research her family history. Wong shared approximately 1.2% of her DNA with Jane Doe, suggesting they were third cousins or possibly second cousins once removed. The genealogical research process was methodical and time-consuming. Carter traced Patricia Wong's family tree backward through census records, birth certificates, marriage licenses, and death certificates. She identified Wong's great-great-grandparents, then traced their descendants forward through multiple generations. The family tree spreadsheet grew to include hundreds of names across 5 generations. Each branch represented potential connections to Jane Doe. Each connection required verification through additional records and research. After 3 months of genealogical work, Carter identified a cluster of families that might connect to Jane Doe. The surnames included Thompson, Miller, Davis, and Rodriguez. Common names that made research challenging, but not impossible. I've narrowed it down to about 40 possible candidates, Carter reported. Women born between 1965 and 1980s who descended from the same ancestral lines as our genetic matches. Now we need to determine which of these women might be Jane Doe. The candidate list included women from Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. Some had died and been buried, which eliminated them immediately. Others were still alive and could be ruled out through direct contact or social media verification. Detective Park began the process of investigating each candidate. Birth records, school enrollment, employment history, social security records. Any documentation that might confirm or eliminate a potential match. Sarah Thompson appeared on 3 separate family trees, suggesting she might be related to multiple genetic matches. Born in 1975 in Baltimore, she would have been approximately 25 when Jane Doe was killed, but Thompson's death certificate showed she had died in a car accident in 1998, 2 years before Jane Doe's estimated death. Mary Rodriguez had been born in 1970 and lived in Baltimore County during the late 1990s. She had no death certificate on file, no recent Social Security activity, no current address. Detective Park spent 2 weeks trying to locate Rodriguez or determine what had happened to her. The breakthrough came through Rodriguez's sister, who confirmed that Mary had struggled with addiction and had been living on the streets of Baltimore in 2000. She had last been seen in the spring of that year and had never been officially reported missing because the family assumed she had moved to another city. The worldwide pandemic that began in early 2020 affected cold case investigations in ways that no one could have anticipated. Forensic laboratories closed or operated with reduced capacity. DNA analysis backlogs grew from months to years. Genealogical research that depended on accessing physical records came to a halt when archives and courthouses closed their doors. Detective Park received the notice in March 2020. All non-essential forensic analysis would be suspended indefinitely. Jane Doe's genealogy case, which had been showing promising results, was classified as non-urgent and placed on indefinite hold. "I understand the health considerations," Park told her supervisor, Lieutenant Rodriguez. "But Jane Doe has been waiting 20 years. Her family is still out there somewhere, still wondering what happened to her." The pandemic forced everyone to confront questions about what qualified as essential work. Emergency cases involving active investigations took priority. Sexual assault kits from recent crimes couldn't wait. DNA analysis for current homicide cases needed immediate attention. Jane Doe, tragic as her case was, fell into the category of work that could be delayed. Dr. Michelle Carter at Parabon Nanolabs faced similar constraints. Her genealogical research required access to historical records housed in libraries, courthouses, and archives. When those institutions closed to public access, her investigation stalled just as it was approaching potential breakthroughs. "I had narrowed the candidates down to 6 women," Carter reported by email. "I just needed to verify a few more records to complete the family trees. But those records are in the Baltimore County Courthouse, and I can't access them remotely." The pause was particularly frustrating because genetic genealogy was a rapidly evolving field. New techniques and databases were being developed constantly. Every month of delay meant missing opportunities to use the latest tools and information sources. Jane Doe's case file, which had been pulled for active review, was returned to the cold case filing system. Her photograph was removed from Detective Park's active cases bulletin board and placed back in the Manila folder where it had spent most of the previous 20 years. The community impact was subtler, but no less real. The annual memorial service for Jane Doe was canceled due to gathering restrictions. The flowers that had been regularly placed on her grave came less frequently as people focused on immediate health concerns affecting their own families. The genealogy websites that had provided crucial leads saw changes in usage patterns. Some people had more time for family history research while working from home. Others found their attention consumed by pandemic concerns and economic uncertainty. Dr. Carter used the forced break to review her previous work and plan strategies for when research could resume. She refined her family trees using online resources and prepared detailed research plans for when physical archives reopened. "Jane Doe's case taught me the importance of redundant research methods," Carter reflected. We can't depend on any single approach or resource. When one door closes, we need multiple backup plans ready to implement. The pandemic pause represented another layer of delay in a case that had already stretched across 2 decades. Jane Doe continued waiting for her name to be restored, for justice to be served, for her family to learn what had happened to their daughter, but the dedication of investigators and genealogists remained strong, even during forced delays. The email arrived in Detective Park's inbox on a Tuesday morning in March 2023. Subject line: Jane Doe case, 2000 to 247, potential genetic match identified. After 3 years of pandemic delays and bureaucratic obstacles, forensic genealogy had finally produced a breakthrough. Dr. Michelle Carter's message was cautiously optimistic. We have identified a potential match for Jane Doe through genetic genealogy. The candidate is Maria Elena Rodriguez, born 1975 in Baltimore, Maryland. She disappeared from family contact in early 2000 and has no recorded Social Security activity after that date. I recommend immediate follow-up investigation. Park read the email twice before calling Carter for additional details. Rodriguez had appeared on their candidate list in 2019, but had been difficult to investigate due to limited records and family estrangement. The pandemic delays had actually helped Carter's research by giving her time to build more comprehensive family trees and identify additional genetic connections. The DNA evidence is strong, Carter explained during their phone call. Maria Rodriguez's sister provided a DNA sample for comparison, and the genetic relationship is consistent with Jane Doe being Maria, but we'll need dental records or additional family DNA to make a definitive identification. Maria Elena Rodriguez had been born at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. On September 15, 1975, she had attended local schools through 10th grade before dropping out. Her family described her as troubled, struggling with addiction and mental health issues throughout her teens and early 20s. According to her sister Carmen, Maria had been living in a series of temporary housing situations during 1999 and early 2000. She had last been seen in March 2000, when she borrowed $20 from Carmen for food and bus fare. The family had assumed she had moved to another city, as she had done several times before. We didn't report her missing because Maria came and went, Carmen explained during Detective Park's interview. She would disappear for months, then show up asking for money or a place to stay. We thought this was just another one of her disappearing acts. The family had never connected Maria's absence to news reports about Jane Doe's discovery in October 2000. The facial reconstruction hadn't triggered recognition, possibly because Maria had lost significant weight due to drug use during her final months. The clay model showed healthy features that didn't match how family members remembered Maria's appearance. Carmen provided additional DNA samples and helped Park locate Maria's dental records. The dentist's office had changed ownership twice since 2000, but the new owners had maintained old patient files in storage. Maria's dental charts showed several distinctive characteristics that could be compared to Jane Doe's skeletal remains. The dental comparison took 2 weeks to complete. Dr. Patricia Chen from the medical examiner's office conducted the analysis personally, checking each tooth against the corresponding elements in Jane Doe's skull. "It's a positive match, Doctor," Chen announced during a conference call with Park and Carter. The dental evidence strongly supports the identification of Jane Doe as Maria Elena Rodriguez. Park felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. After 23 years, Jane Doe finally had her name back. But the identification opened a new phase of investigation. Maria Rodriguez had been murdered. Someone had killed her and hidden her body in the woods. Someone had let her family believe she had simply disappeared voluntarily. The case was no longer about identification. Now, it was about justice. Detective Park stared at the blank press release template on her computer screen. How do you announce that a 23-year mystery has been solved? How do you balance public interest with family privacy? How do you honor both the victim's memory and the investigation's complexity? The Baltimore County Police Department's Media Relations Office had provided guidelines for cold case announcements. But Jane Doe's case felt different. She had become a symbol of all the nameless victims, all the unsolved mysteries, all the families still waiting for answers. Her identification would make national news. Draft after draft found its way into the computer's trash folder. The first version was too clinical, reading like an autopsy report. The second was too emotional, sounding like a eulogy. The third revealed too many investigative details that might compromise the ongoing homicide investigation. Public Information Officer Lisa Martinez, no relation to the original detective, offered guidance based on her experience with high-profile cases. Focus on the identification breakthrough. Thank the family for their cooperation, and emphasize that the homicide investigation continues, she advised. The press release needed to serve multiple audiences. Media outlets wanted compelling details for their stories. The general public deserved basic information about the case resolution. Other families of missing persons needed hope that their cases might also be solved. Law enforcement agencies needed to see the value of investing in cold case investigations and advanced forensic techniques. But Maria Rodriguez's family also deserved consideration. They had just learned that their sister had been murdered 23 years earlier. Their private grief was about to become public property. Their family history would be scrutinized by journalists and amateur investigators. Carmen Rodriguez had given permission for the identification to be announced, but she asked that certain details remain private. Maria's struggles with addiction didn't need to be highlighted in press reports. Her family's assumption that she had left voluntarily was already causing them guilt and regret. "We want people to know that Maria mattered," Carmen told Detective Park. "She wasn't just Jane Doe, she was our sister. She had a name and a family who loved her." The final press release struck a balance between public information and family dignity. Baltimore County Police announced the identification of Jane Doe 2000-247 as Maria Elena Rodriguez, age 25, of Baltimore, Maryland. Miss Rodriguez was reported missing by her family in early 2000. Her remains were discovered in October 2000 in a wooded area of White Marsh. Advanced DNA genealogy techniques conducted by Parabon Nanolabs led to her identification. The case remains an active homicide investigation. Anyone with information about Miss Rodriguez's final months or activities in early 2000 is asked to contact Baltimore County Police. The press release would be distributed to media outlets across the Mid-Atlantic region and uploaded to the police department's website and social media accounts. Within hours, Maria Elena Rodriguez's name would appear in newspaper headlines, television reports, and internet forums. Jane Doe was finally going home. The evidence storage box bore a simple label: Rodriguez, Maria Elena, aka Jane Doe, 2000-247. Inside, 24 years of investigation had been carefully cataloged and preserved. Each item told part of a story that investigators were still trying to understand. Detective Park opened the box in the Baltimore County Police Department's evidence room, preparing for the homicide investigation that would follow Maria's identification. The original crime scene photographs lay in protective sleeves, showing the wooded lot where hunters had found her remains. The images seemed different now that she had a name and a story. The clothing fragments had been preserved in separate containers. Maria's light-colored shirt, possibly white or cream, had deteriorated significantly over the years. The dark fabric from her lower body showed signs of synthetic material, probably polyester blend pants or jeans. No distinctive patterns or logos had survived exposure to weather and soil. The bones had been returned to the evidence room after Dr. Chen completed the dental identification. Each bone was labeled and stored in protective containers. The skull that had formed the basis for facial reconstructions now carried Maria's name instead of a case number. Personal effects were notably absent. No jewelry, no purse, no identification. Maria had died with nothing to mark her identity except the clothes on her body and the secrets locked in her bones. The killer had been thorough in removing any obvious identifying information. The DNA samples that had finally revealed Maria's identity were stored in labeled vials. Blood samples from Maria's sister Carmen sat nearby, evidence of the genetic connection that had broken the case. The family resemblance existed in molecules too small to see but strong enough to solve a mystery. Detective Park found the original crime scene sketches and compared them to current photographs of the area. The wooded lot had been developed years earlier, the discovery site now buried under a shopping center parking lot. The exact location where Maria's body had been found was marked by a handicapped parking space outside a chain restaurant. The case files filled 3 thick binders, documenting every lead followed, every comparison made, every hope raised and dashed. The files read like an encyclopedia of disappointment, filled with names of women who weren't Maria and families who weren't hers. The facial reconstruction materials occupied a separate container. The clay model had been preserved, though it no longer served any investigative purpose. The reconstruction had done its job, not by generating identification directly, but by keeping Maria's case in public awareness until technology could catch up with tragedy. Park found evidence of leads she had never heard of: a psychic in Pennsylvania who claimed to have visions of the crime, a convicted murderer in Virginia who had confessed to killing Jane Doe, then recanted when details didn't match, a homeless man in Delaware who insisted he had seen the body being dumped, but couldn't remember when or where. Each false lead had required investigation. Each investigation had consumed time and resources. Each disappointment had added weight to the case that every detective carried. Now, the evidence box would serve a different purpose. Instead of supporting identification efforts, it would help investigators understand Maria's final days and find her killer. The same bones and fragments that had been mystery for decades might now provide clues about motive, method, and opportunity. Maria Elena Rodriguez was no longer Jane Doe, but she was still a victim waiting for justice. The interview room in the Baltimore County Police Department felt heavy with emotion as Detective Park sat across from Carmen Rodriguez and her mother, Elena Rodriguez. Maria's family had agreed to provide background information that might help with the homicide investigation, but 23 years of assuming Maria was alive made her death difficult to process. "Tell me about Maria," Detective Park began gently. "What was she like? What was happening in her life in early 2000? Elena Rodriguez, now 71 years old, held a photograph of Maria from her high school graduation. "She was beautiful, but troubled," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The drugs changed her. By 2000, she wasn't the same girl who used to help me cook dinner and laugh at silly movies." Carmen provided more specific details about Maria's situation during her final months. She was staying in different places, sometimes with friends, sometimes in shelters, sometimes on the street. She would come by the house every few weeks asking for money or food. We always helped her, but we made it clear she couldn't live with us while she was using. The family dynamics were complex. Elena had been a single mother raising 4 children while working 2 jobs. Carmen, 5 years older than Maria, had tried to be a protective big sister but had her own family responsibilities. Maria's 2 brothers had limited contact with her during her final years. Maria was scared of someone, Carmen remembered. In late 1999 and early 2000, she kept saying that someone was following her, that someone wanted to hurt her. "We thought it was paranoia from the drugs. I wish we had taken her more seriously." Detective Park asked about Maria's relationships and acquaintances. The family knew few details about Maria's life outside their occasional contact. She had mentioned a boyfriend named Mike or Miguel, but they had never met him. She sometimes talked about staying with friends, but didn't provide names or addresses. "She was living in a world we didn't understand," Elena explained. "Drug dealers, addicts, people who moved from place to place. We tried to get her help, but she had to want to change. She wasn't ready." The last confirmed sighting of Maria was March 15, 2000, when she visited Carmen's apartment, asking for $20. Carmen had given her the money, despite knowing it would likely be used for drugs. Maria had seemed more agitated than usual, looking over her shoulder and asking if anyone had been asking about her. "She said she might have to go away for a while," Carmen recalled. "She said if anyone came looking for her, to tell them she had gone to California. I thought she meant she was planning to move there. I never thought." The interview revealed the tragic reality of Maria's final years. She had become increasingly isolated from family, struggling with addiction in a dangerous environment. Her disappearance hadn't triggered immediate concern because temporary absences had become normal. By the time her absence seemed permanent, the trail was already cold. Elena Rodriguez asked the question that had been haunting her since Maria's identification. Did she suffer? Was she scared when she died? Detective Park couldn't answer those questions yet, but she promised that the investigation would continue until Maria's killer was found. The family deserved justice, and Maria deserved peace. The timeline revealed several critical gaps. Maria's disappearance in March 2000 hadn't been reported to police, so her name never appeared in missing persons databases during the crucial early years of investigation. Her family's assumption that she had left voluntarily meant she was never listed among the women investigators were actively trying to identify. The isotope testing in 2017 had provided crucial confirmation that Jane Doe was local, but the technology wasn't available earlier when memory and evidence were fresher. If isotope analysis had been possible in 2000, investigators might have focused more intensively on local cases. The genealogy breakthrough in 2023 depended on Maria's sister Carmen submitting DNA to genealogy databases. If Carmen hadn't been interested in family history research, Maria might still be unidentified. The solution had required not just scientific advancement, but fortunate circumstances and family participation. Detective Park identified several investigative opportunities that still existed. Maria's boyfriend, Mike, or Miguel, had never been located or interviewed. The person or situation that had made Maria fearful in her final months remained unknown. The specific circumstances of her death and body disposal had never been determined. The timeline showed how cold case investigation had evolved over 20 years. Early efforts relied on traditional forensic methods and media appeals. Later phases incorporated digital databases and social media outreach. The final breakthrough came through genetic genealogy that didn't exist when Maria first disappeared, but the timeline also revealed constants. Detective dedication had never wavered. Family grief had persisted across decades. Community concern had endured even when attention shifted to newer tragedies. Maria's story was finally complete, but her killer remained free. The letters began arriving at the Baltimore County Police Department within days of announcing Maria Rodriguez's identification. Community members who had followed Jane Doe's case for 23 years wanted to express their emotions, share their memories, and ask about the ongoing investigation. Mrs. Margaret Thompson, who had brought her granddaughter to the original vigil in 2000, wrote about the closure she felt upon learning Jane Doe's name. "I have prayed for that young woman every Sunday for 23 years, she wrote. "I am heartbroken that she suffered, but grateful that she finally has her name back. Maria Elena Rodriguez will not be forgotten." The letters revealed how deeply Jane Doe's story had affected the community. Parents wrote about explaining stranger danger to their children after her discovery. Young women wrote about walking with friends after dark instead of alone. Families wrote about holding their daughters tighter and calling more often. Pastor David Kellerman, who had organized the original vigil, sent a formal letter asking permission to hold a memorial service for Maria. "Our congregation has mourned an unnamed daughter for over 2 decades, he wrote. "Now we would like to celebrate Maria Rodriguez's life and pray for justice for her family." Some letters asked difficult questions about the ongoing investigation. Why hadn't Maria been reported missing initially? How had she remained unidentified for so long? What was being done to find her killer? Detective Park couldn't answer all the questions due to the active investigation, but she appreciated the community's continued concern. The Baltimore Sun published several letters to the editor from readers who had followed Maria's case over the years. One writer, identified as a mother from Towson, expressed frustration with societal attitudes toward missing women from marginalized populations. If Maria had been a college student or young professional, would her disappearance have been investigated more aggressively? The letter asked. "We need to examine how drug addiction and homelessness affect the urgency with which we search for missing people." True crime enthusiasts from across the country sent messages expressing satisfaction at Maria's identification but disappointment that her killer hadn't been caught. Online forums had followed Jane Doe's case for years, with amateur investigators proposing theories and analyzing evidence. Maria's identification validated their interest but opened new questions about who had killed her and why. Elementary school teacher Lisa Martinez, the third person named Martinez involved in the case, wrote about using Maria's story to discuss empathy and community responsibility with her students. "I tell my class that Maria was someone's daughter, sister, and friend," she wrote. "When we see homeless people or those struggling with addiction, we should remember they are someone's family too." The letters showed that Maria's identification had resonated beyond simple closure. Her story raised questions about social services, law enforcement priorities, and community responsibility for vulnerable populations. She had become a symbol not just of unsolved crimes, but of societal attitudes toward people on society's margins. Carmen Rodriguez asked Detective Park to read some of the letters aloud during their next meeting. "I want to know that people cared about Maria, even when they didn't know her name," Carmen said. "She spent her life feeling like nobody cared. I want her to know that wasn't true." The Baltimore County Police Department's Cold Case Review Board met quarterly to assess unsolved investigations and allocate resources for renewed efforts. Jane Doe, 2000 to 247, now identified as Maria Elena Rodriguez, had been discussed at 17 of these meetings over the years. The minutes documented institutional knowledge, investigative decisions, and resource allocation that had shaped Maria's case. Board meeting. January 15, 2005. Jane Doe case reviewed. No new evidence or leads in past year. Recommend continued monitoring for potential matches in missing persons databases. Case to remain in active cold case files. Board meeting. July 22, 2008. Jane Doe facial reconstruction. To be re-released to media. Budget approved for updated clay model and photography. Detective Martinez retiring. Case to be reassigned to Detective Park. Board meeting. October 12, 2012. Jane Doe case, 12 years old. Evidence degradation concerns noted. DNA samples remain viable. Recommend preservation protocols for long-term storage. No budget allocation for active investigation. Board meeting. April 18, 2017. Isotope testing approved for Jane Doe case. New technology may provide geographic origin information. Budget allocation. $3,500 for analysis through Smithsonian Institution. The minutes revealed institutional struggles with cold case management. Limited budgets required choices between cases. Competing priorities meant some investigations received more attention than others. Personnel changes disrupted case continuity. Technological advances created opportunities but also expenses. Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez, who chaired the review board from 2015 to 2022, had been a consistent advocate for Jane Doe's case. Her notes appeared in multiple meeting minutes, arguing for continued investigation despite the passage of time. "This victim deserves justice regardless of how much time has passed," Rodriguez wrote in 2018. "Our commitment to solving homicides cannot have an expiration date." Jane Doe represents dozens of unidentified victims whose cases we might solve with persistent effort and advancing technology. The genealogy analysis approval came after heated debate in 2019. Board members questioned spending resources on a 20-year-old case when newer investigations needed attention. Detective Park had prepared a detailed presentation, arguing that genetic genealogy offered the best hope for identification. Board meeting, March 8, 2019. Detective Park presented compelling case for genealogy analysis of Jane Doe evidence. Technology has solved similar cold cases nationwide. Unanimous approval for $15,000 budget allocation to Parabon Nanolabs. Timeline estimated at 6 to 12 months for results. The COVID-19 pandemic disrupted board meetings and case reviews throughout 2020 and 2021. Remote meetings focused on immediate operational concerns rather than cold case strategy. Jane Doe's genealogy analysis was placed on hold, along with other non-essential forensic work. Board meeting, December 10, 2021. Cold case. Investigations resuming as laboratory capacity returns to normal. Jane Doe genealogy analysis to restart January 2022. Detective Park reports progress on family tree construction prior to pandemic delays. The identification breakthrough in 2023 generated the longest set of meeting minutes in the board's history. Members expressed satisfaction at solving a case that had consumed resources for over 2 decades, but also concern about the homicide investigation that would follow. Board meeting, May 15, 2023. Jane Doe, identified as Maria Elena Rodriguez through genetic genealogy. Positive dental confirmation received. Case transitions from identification to active homicide investigation. Additional resources approved for suspect investigation. Detective Park to lead expanded investigative team. The minutes documented how institutional knowledge had been preserved across personnel changes, budget constraints, and technological evolution. Maria's case had survived because dedicated individuals had refused to let it be forgotten, even when easier options existed. The morning sun filtered through the oak trees at Mountain View Cemetery, casting long shadows across the rows of granite headstones. Detective Park stood before the simple marker that had read "Unidentified Female, 2000, for 23 years. Soon, it would bear Maria Elena Rodriguez's name. Carmen Rodriguez knelt beside the grave, placing fresh flowers where others had left tributes to an unknown woman. "I used to drive by here sometimes," Carmen admitted to Detective Park. "I never knew Maria was here. I thought she was living somewhere else, maybe getting her life together." The cemetery maintenance crew had removed flowers left by strangers over the years, community members who felt compelled to honor Jane Doe's memory, despite not knowing her identity. The ritual had continued even when media attention faded and other cases captured public interest. Pastor Kellerman arrived with a small group from his congregation. People who had attended the original vigil in 2000. They had aged visibly over 2 decades, gray hair replacing brown, grandchildren now where children once stood. But their commitment to Maria's memory remained unchanged. "We prayed for her as Jane Doe," Pastor Kellerman told Carmen. "Now we can pray for her as Maria. Her name makes her memory more real, but our concern for her was always real." Elena Rodriguez, Maria's mother, sat in a wheelchair near the headstone. She had suffered a stroke 2 years earlier and spoke with difficulty. But her eyes remained clear as she looked at the place where her daughter had rested anonymously for so long. "Maria, we found you," Elena whispered, her words barely audible in the morning stillness. "We didn't forget you. We never stopped looking." Detective Park had attended cemetery services for other victims during her career. But Maria's case felt different. The decades of uncertainty, the community investment in her story, the technological breakthrough that had finally provided answers. All of it converged in this quiet moment among the trees. The homicide investigation would continue. Someone had killed Maria and hidden her body in the woods. Someone had allowed her family to believe she had simply chosen to disappear. Someone had counted on her death being forgotten, her name never spoken, her story never told. But the investigation was no longer about identification. It was about justice. Maria Elena Rodriguez had her name back. She had her family around her grave. She had a community that remembered her story and demanded accountability for her death. The sun climbed higher through the oak branches, warming the cemetery with the promise of a new day. Maria would no longer be the unknown woman in the woods. She would no longer be defined by her absence, her silence, her anonymity. She was Maria Elena Rodriguez, daughter of Elena, sister of Carmen, victim of violence, symbol of persistence, reminder that every life matters and every death deserves investigation. The dawn light seemed to promise that truth, delayed but not denied, would eventually illuminate the darkness surrounding her murder. Someone would be held accountable. Justice would be served. Maria's story would finally be complete. Until then, her family would visit her grave with fresh flowers and spoken prayers. The community would remember her name and support the ongoing investigation. Detective Park would continue following leads, interviewing witnesses, and building the case that would bring Maria's killer to trial. The cemetery fell quiet as visitors began to leave. But the promise remained written in morning light and carved in stone. Maria Elena Rodriguez would not be forgotten again.